My parents left me a half-ruined house in the village as inheritance, and my brother a 3-bedroom apartment in the capital. My wife called me a loser and kicked us out. I went to the village with my daughter, and when I stepped inside, I was stunned. I'm Thomas, 38, and my own family left me and my 8-year-old daughter for dead, with nothing but a crumbling house in the middle of nowhere. Before I tell you how I uncovered a secret that turned their world upside down, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. The wind howled, a mournful sound that seemed to snake its way through the bare branches of the skeletal trees surrounding us. It was a cold, bitter wind for late October, the kind that gets deep into your bones. My daughter, Emma, who was just 8 years old, pressed herself against my leg, her small hand clutching mine so tightly I could feel her knuckles. "Dad," she whispered, her voice snatched away by the wind. "I'm scared. It looks like a monster's house." I looked up, and I couldn't tell her she was wrong. The house stood on a small rise, silhouetted against a bruised, twilight sky. The paint, which I vaguely remembered as being a cheerful white from childhood visits, was now a tapestry of peeling gray and blackish mildew. 2 shutters on the second floor had broken free. One hung from a single hinge, banging a grim, rhythmic tattoo against the side of the house, while the other was gone completely, leaving a dark, gaping maw that looked like a missing eye. The porch sagged in the center with a look of utter defeat. It didn't just look abandoned. It looked cursed. This was my inheritance, the grand prize for a life lived quietly, a monument to my failure. Just 72 hours earlier, my life had been contained, predictable. I woke up, I made Emma breakfast, I went to my job as a librarian, a job I genuinely loved. I came home. It was a small life, but it was mine. Now, that memory felt like a faded photograph of a stranger. My mind was stuck on a loop, endlessly replaying the scene in Mr. Abernathy's sterile, quiet office. The room had smelled of lemon polish and old, important paper. I sat on a stiff leather chair that sighed every time I moved. My brother, Anton, sat opposite me, looking perfectly at ease, checking his gold watch. Mr. Abernathy, a kind man who had known our family for decades, read my grandmother Maria's will. His voice was a low, steady drone until he reached the crucial part. "To my grandson, Anton, a man of the city and of business, I leave my 3-bedroom apartment in the capital and all of its contents." Anton leaned back, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across his face. He was the CEO of a small tech startup, the son who had fulfilled every one of my father's ambitions. He shot me a look across the polished mahogany table, a look that was part pity, part victory. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat, his eyes flicking to me for a brief, unreadable moment. "And to my grandson, Thomas," he continued, "a man of stories and of the earth, I leave my ancestral home in the village of Riverdale and all that it contains." The silence in that room was a living thing, pressed in on me, suffocating me. An apartment worth close to $1 million for Anton. And for me, the family footnote, a collapsing house 200 miles from civilization. Anton shattered the silence with a laugh. Not a chuckle, but a loud, barking laugh of genuine amusement. "Oh, that is perfect. That is just perfect," he boomed. Standing up, he came around the table and slapped me on the back, a gesture that was meant to look friendly, but was designed to show his dominance. "Well, little brother, I guess you'll have plenty of time for your stories out there. Enjoy chopping firewood." The humiliation was a physical burn at the back of my neck. But that was just the appetizer. The main course of my degradation was served up by my own wife, Rebecca. I walked into our rented apartment, the sound of Anton's laughter still ringing in my ears, and found her pacing in the living room, her arms crossed, her foot tapping an impatient rhythm on the hardwood floor. "Well?" she snapped, her eyes like chips of ice. "Don't keep me in suspense. What did the queen leave her favorite bookworm?" Couldn't look at her. I focused on a spot on the wall behind her head. "I got the house," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "The old family house in Riverdale." Her face went through 3 distinct stages in about 2 seconds. First, disbelief. Then, contempt. Finally, a pure, white-hot rage that seemed to radiate from her. "You have got to be kidding me," she hissed. "A worthless, rotting shack in the middle of nowhere? Your brother gets a fortune, a literal fortune, and you, as usual, come away with nothing. Less than nothing. A liability." She stepped closer, poking a finger into my chest. "Do you have any idea how this makes me look? Married to the family reject. The charity case. Rebecca, please." "No. I'm done pleasing. I have stood by you while you've played with your dusty books in that dead-end job. I have pretended to be proud of you at family dinners while your parents and your brother talked about you like you were a child. But this is the last straw. You are a failure, Thomas. A black hole of bad luck. And I will not be dragged down with you." Her voice then dropped, becoming terrifyingly calm. "I want you out. Tonight." "What? Rebecca, this is my home." "Emma, it's my home. The lease is in my name, remember? Because your credit wasn't good enough. So get your things and take your daughter with you. Go live in your precious pile of dirt." The finality in her voice was absolute. There was no appeal. So here we were, a father and a daughter, with 2 suitcases filled with the wreckage of our lives, standing on the doorstep of a house that looked as broken as my heart. I forced my numb fingers to work, sliding the heavy, cold iron key into the lock. It resisted, then turned with a rusty scream of protest. I put my shoulder to the door and pushed. It groaned open, revealing a wall of darkness inside. And I was stunned. The air that greeted us wasn't the damp, mildewed breath of a tomb I'd braced myself for. It was clean. It was dry. It carried the faint, comforting sense of beeswax, dried herbs, and old paper. My eyes adjusted to the gloom, and I could make out shapes. Furniture shrouded in white dustcloths, looking like sleeping ghosts. The floorboards, though scarred with age, were swept clean of any debris. On the stone mantelpiece of the fireplace, a single, unlit candle stood in a silver holder, its surface free of dust. It was impossible. The house had been empty for the better part of a year, ever since Grandma Maria's health had declined and she'd moved into a nursing home closer to the city. A house left to itself for a year in the damp countryside should have been a disaster of cobwebs, dust, and decay. This felt preserved, waiting. As I stood on the threshold, a ghost from my own past emerged, not from the house, but from my memory. The injustice of the will reading wasn't a singular event. It was the capstone on a pyramid of slights and dismissals built over a lifetime. My family had always operated on a clear, unspoken 2-tier system. There was Anton, the asset, and there was me, the liability. I was suddenly 10 years old again, at the most excruciatingly cheerful place on earth, a family Christmas party. The house was loud with chatter and the scent of roast turkey and pine needles. I'd spent the entire autumn holed up in my room, not reading for once, but building. I had meticulously crafted a 6-foot-tall model of a medieval castle out of cardboard boxes, paper towel tubes, and an ocean of Elmer's glue. It had battlements, a working drawbridge made with string, and tiny, hand-drawn flags. It was my masterpiece. I remember the struggle of carrying it down the stairs and into the living room, my heart thumping with pride. "Look," I announced to the room at large. Everybody, "Look what I made." My father, Richard, was in a deep discussion with my uncle about stock options. He glanced over, a flicker of something. Was it annoyance at the interruption? In his eyes. That's nice, son. Very creative. Don't get glue on the carpet." He turned back to his conversation. My mother, Eleanor, was fluttering around, making sure everyone's wine glass was full. She swooped past me, patted my head, and said, "Oh, that's lovely, dear. Such an imagination." Then she leaned in toward my aunt. "Did I tell you Anton made the honor roll again? His economics teacher says he has a real mind for business. The praise, the attention, the approval, it was a currency, and in my family, Anton had all of it. I was left standing there with my magnificent cardboard castle, feeling my creation, and by extension myself, shrink until it was small and stupid. I felt a hot flush of shame and was about to haul my castle back upstairs to the safety of my room when a warm, wrinkled hand landed gently on my shoulder. "Thomas," Grandma Maria said, her voice a soft counterpoint to the room's loud chatter. She didn't just glance at my castle. She looked at it. She walked around it slowly, her eyes taking in every detail. "My goodness, this is extraordinary. Tell me about it. Is there a king? Or is it ruled by a wise queen?" For the next hour, she sat on the floor with me, oblivious to the stock market chatter and the gossip. She listened, completely captivated, as I told her the entire history of my fictional kingdom. She was the only person who ever saw value in the worlds I built. To everyone else, I was just playing. To her, I was creating. This dynamic never changed. When it was time for college, I remember sitting at the dining room table with a course catalog. My heart wanted the literature department. I dreamed of studying poetry, of losing myself in the classics. Literature. My father had scoffed when I mentioned it. He put down his fork with a loud clink. "What are you going to do with that? Open a feelings store? Thomas, you need to be practical. Look at your brother. He's going for a business degree. That's the future. That's security." "Richard's right, dear." My mother had chimed in, always the gentle enforcer of my father's will. "Maybe something like communications? Or marketing. You like to read, you can read marketing reports." They weren't being malicious. In their minds, they were being helpful, steering their strange, impractical son toward a safe harbor. They simply could not comprehend that a life spent among stories could be a life well lived. I ended up with a degree in library science, a compromise that felt like a quiet surrender. The long bus ride to Riverdale had been a rolling tomb of silence. Emma had eventually cried herself to sleep against my shoulder, her small body shuddering with hiccuping breaths. I stared out at the endless black ribbon of the highway, my mind a churning mess of past humiliations and future fears. How was I going to do this? My savings account was a joke. I had a few $1,000s to my name. Enough for a month, maybe two, if we ate nothing but beans and rice. What then? The sheer terror of it was a physical weight on my chest. I was a father. I was supposed to be the rock, the provider. And I was failing spectacularly in front of the one person whose opinion of me mattered more than anything in the world. Then her question, whispered in the dim light of the bus, had pierced right through me. "Dad," she'd asked, her voice thick with sleep, "is it because you don't make as much money as Uncle Anton? Is that why Mom is so angry?" An 8-year-old. She had seen it all, understood it all, with the brutal clarity of a child. And she was asking if our family's love was transactional. She was asking if she was being punished because her father wasn't rich. I didn't know how to answer without confirming her worst fears. I just held her tighter and whispered, "No, sweetie, it's not your fault. It's just grown-up stuff." It was the lamest, most inadequate answer of my life. That's when my phone had buzzed. I had almost thrown it against the window. I expected it to be Rebecca, or maybe my mother, calling to administer another dose of pity or advice. But the name on the screen was Sarah. Sarah was the head archivist at the city library, my boss and my friend. She was fiercely intelligent, with a dry wit and a deep, abiding respect for the power of a good story. I answered, my voice a croak. "Hey, Thomas," she said, and her voice was a lifeline. It was calm, strong, and completely devoid of pity. "I just heard the news from a very gossipy page. I'm not going to ask what happened. I'm asking how you are. You and Emma. What do you need?" The directness of it, the simple offer of help, was so different from the suffocating concern of my family that it brought tears to my eyes. "We're on a bus," I stammered. "Going to the house. The one in Riverdale." "Okay," she said, a general taking command. "First, you are a wonderful father and one of the most brilliant people I know. What you know about 17th century manuscripts alone makes you a treasure. Don't let a family of accountants ever tell you otherwise. Second, when you get there, check the fuse box and the water heater. Old houses get grumpy. Third, call me. If you need money for groceries, if you need someone to research septic tank repair, if you just need to scream about how unfair it all is, I'm here." "You're not alone in this." We talked for a few more minutes, and by the time we hung up, the crushing weight on my chest had lifted, just a little. She hadn't offered vague platitudes. She'd offered respect and practical help. She saw my knowledge not as a useless hobby, but as a form of wealth. It was a perspective so alien to my upbringing that it felt revolutionary. The bus finally hissed to a stop at a desolate crossroads. "Riverdale," the driver announced to the empty bus. We were the only passengers left. I gathered our suitcases, which suddenly felt impossibly heavy, and took Emma's small, trusting hand. We walked down a dark, unlit road, the sounds of the night, crickets, the rustle of unseen things in the woods, feeling alien and threatening. And then we saw the house. It loomed out of the darkness, worse than any memory, a hulking shape of decay and sorrow. It looked like the physical embodiment of my family's opinion of me. Emma stopped walking, her feet planted on the cracked asphalt. She looked up at me, her face a pale oval in the gloom, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Are we really going to live here?" I looked at her, my brave, sweet daughter, who deserved a castle and instead was getting this haunted wreck. I looked at the house, a testament to all my perceived failures. And for the life of me, I couldn't find a single word of reassurance to give her. All I could do was nod, because it was the truth, and lead her up the sagging steps, each one groaning in protest, as if the house itself was trying to reject us. The moment we stepped over the threshold, a woman emerged from the shadows of what looked like a small kitchen. She was older, with sharp, intelligent blue eyes that seemed to take in our entire situation in a single glance. A cloud of snow-white hair was pinned neatly on her head. She held a feather duster like a scepter. "Well, for heaven's sake," she said, her voice a surprising mix of gravel and kindness. "Took you long enough. You must be Thomas. You have Maria's eyes." I was so taken aback I could only nod dumbly. "I am. I'm sorry, have we met?" "The name's Agnes Gable. Most folks call me Mrs. Gable. Lived in that house there?" She gestured with her duster toward a neat little cottage next door. "For 50 years. Your grandmother and I were thick as thieves." She gave us a wry smile. Before she had to go to that place in the city, she sat me down in her kitchen, made me a cup of tea, and she made me promise. "Promise what?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. "Agnes," she said to me, "I need you to keep the old place ready. Just air it out once a week. Keep the dust from settling too deep. Maybe put some flowers on the table now and then." She gave me a key and a small monthly payment for my trouble. I never knew what she was planning, but Maria was a woman who always had a plan. "I guess you and this little one," she winked at Emma, "are the plan." Mrs. Gable's presence was like a lighthouse in a storm. She bustled around, showing me the quirks of the old furnace, pointing out the new water heater she said Maria had installed just a couple of years prior, and pressing a still-warm oatmeal cookie from a tin into Emma's hand. Her matter-of-fact kindness was a soothing balm on my raw nerves. After promising to check on us in the morning, she left, leaving the house feeling less like a tomb and more like a refuge. We spent the next day in the slow, methodical process of unpacking. It was a grim task, each object a reminder of the life that had been ripped away. As I unpacked a box of kitchen supplies, I found Rebecca's old tablet tucked between some pots and pans. She must have packed it by mistake and then forgotten it in her rush to evict us. It was top of the line, of course. A new one had probably already been delivered to her by the time we were on the bus. My first thought was to smash it, to hurl it against the stone fireplace and watch it screen spiderweb into 1,000 pieces. But a colder, more practical thought stopped me. I needed its charger for my own phone, which was on its last legs. I plugged the tablet in, and a few minutes later, the screen lit up with Rebecca's perfectly organized home screen. And then my heart hammered against my ribs. A cascade of email notifications began to pop up at the top of the screen. Her personal account was still logged in. My eyes, against my will, were drawn to the subject lines. Most were junk mail, online shopping receipts. But then I saw a name that made my blood run cold. Anton. There was a whole chain of them. The most recent subject line read simply, "Re, the Thomas problem." A voice in my head screamed at me to put it down, to respect her privacy, to be the better man. But how could I, when they had already decided I wasn't even a man, but a problem to be managed? My hands shaking, I tapped on the email chain. The screen glowed with their betrayal. The messages went back months. It was a slow, calculated campaign. An email from Anton. "Becca had another chat with Dad. He's worried Thomas is getting too comfortable at the library, thinking it's a real career. We need to start framing the Riverdale house not as a punishment, but as an opportunity for him to get back to basics. Dad loves that kind of language." Rebecca's reply, "Good angle. I'll start dropping hints about how stressful the city is, how he seems so tired lately. I can talk about how a simpler life might be good for him and Emma. He's so guilt-ridden about not being a provider. He'll latch onto anything that makes him feel like he's making a noble choice." Another from Anton, just a week before the will reading. "It's done. Grandma's lawyers have been advised of the family consensus. The apartment is secure. Now it's just about the performance. We all need to act surprised and a little sad for Thomas. Mom is rehearsing her sympathetic face. It's going to be quite a show." And the final, gut-wrenching reply from my wife. "Don't worry about my performance. I've been giving it for years. Honestly, Anton, it'll be a relief. He's a sweet man, but he's like a boat anchor. This isn't a betrayal. It's a necessary amputation." Amputation. That's what I was to her. A diseased limb to be cut off so she could move faster. The tablet slipped from my nerveless fingers and clattered onto the floor. I stumbled to the back door, flung it open, and gasped in the cold, clean air, my lungs heaving. The world swam before my eyes. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision made in anger. This was a premeditated execution of my life, plotted by my entire family, with my own wife acting as the cheerful executioner. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, just going through the motions for Emma's sake. Late in the afternoon, as I was numbly stacking some of my grandmother's old books on a shelf, Emma's voice cut through my fog. "Dad, this one's wobbly," she called out from across the room. She was next to a large, built-in bookshelf, filled with what looked like ordinary gardening books and romance novels. She was pushing on the side of it, and it was indeed moving slightly. "Be careful, sweetie, it might be—" I started to say, but then I heard a sound, a low, grinding noise. It wasn't the creak of old wood. It was deeper, heavier, stone on stone. My heart gave a sudden, hard thump. I walked over and ran my fingers along the edge where the bookshelf met the floral wallpaper. There, almost invisible, was a seam. I put my shoulder to it and pushed. The entire unit, books and all, swung slowly and silently inward, revealing a dark, narrow doorway. "Whoa!" Emma breathed, her eyes wide. A draft of cool, ancient air, redolent with the rich scent of leather and aging paper, washed over us. My hand fumbled along the wall inside the opening until my fingers found a cold, brass light switch. I flipped it, and the world changed. It wasn't a closet or a small storage space. It was a library, a vast, two-story library, lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves of dark, gleaming mahogany. Thousands upon thousands of books, bound in leather of every color, their spines glittering with gold leaf. A spiral staircase made of wrought iron led up to a second-floor gallery that wrapped around the entire room. In the center, on a thick Persian rug, sat two enormous, tufted leather armchairs and a desk so large it could have belonged to a king. "It's a secret castle library," Emma shouted, her voice filled with pure, unadulterated joy as she ran inside. I followed her, my feet sinking into the plush rug, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. This magnificent, hidden world had been sitting here, inside this humble little house, all this time. On the massive desk, two things sat waiting. One was a small but heavy iron safe. The other was a single, thick cream-colored envelope. My name was written on it in my grandmother's beautiful, familiar handwriting. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely break the wax seal. Inside was a short, one-page letter and a small, ornate brass key. "My dearest Thomas," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means you have found my secret. I knew you would. Anton would have seen only a crumbling house and called a demolition crew. Your parents would have seen only peeling paint and calculated its lack of value. But you, my boy of stories, you would feel the house's soul. You would know there was more to it. The key is for the safe. Inside, you will find the truth of our family's legacy. It's a heavy burden, but a beautiful one. Know that I have always been proud of you. Your strength is not loud, like your brother's, but it is deep, like the roots of an old tree. Don't let them ever make you doubt that. All my love, Grandma Maria." I looked from her precious, loving words to the poisonous, cruel words on the tablet I'd left in the other room. I looked at my daughter, her face alight with wonder as she gazed up at the towering shelves. And I looked at the safe. The grief and humiliation that had been strangling me for days began to recede, replaced by a new, powerful emotion. It was anger, yes, but a cold, clear, focused anger. And beneath it, a bedrock of resolve. They thought they had written my final chapter. They had no idea I was just about to discover the library where the real stories were kept. The safe opened with a satisfyingly solid clunk. Inside, there was no treasure in the conventional sense. No gold bars, no diamond necklaces. There was something infinitely more valuable. Information. It was filled with stacks of my grandmother's letters, each one a piece of the puzzle. There were meticulously detailed inventories, provenance records, and certificates of authenticity from respected dealers dating back a century. It was the complete history of a secret, and now it was mine. I spent the next week in a state of feverish discovery. I made the secret library my sanctuary. Each morning, I'd make a pot of coffee, and Emma and I would retreat to our hidden world. She would build forts out of cushions and read her fairy tales, while I would sit at the great desk and work my way through my grandmother's papers. It was like getting to know her all over again, not as the kindly old woman who baked cookies, but as a shrewd, intelligent, and fiercely loving protector of her family's true legacy. The collection was breathtaking. It wasn't just a random assortment of old books. It was a carefully curated library of Western thought. There were first editions of Galileo, signed copies of works by Edith Wharton and Mark Twain, and a complete leather-bound set of Shakespeare that was so old the paper was almost translucent. One afternoon, tucked inside a worn copy of Moby Dick, I found a small, personal note from my grandmother to me, written years ago. "Thomas," it said, "this one will teach you that sometimes the greatest monsters are the ones we hunt within ourselves. Remember that." Felt as though she were right there in the room with me, guiding me. But as the wonder of my discovery began to settle, the harsh realities of my situation began to intrude. A library of priceless books couldn't pay for groceries, couldn't fix a leaky roof, and the house, for all its magic, was still old and vulnerable. The test came one rainy Tuesday. A storm, even more ferocious than the first, rolled in off the hills, and a steady rhythmic drip, drip, drip began in the corner of the kitchen. A dark, ugly stain started to spread across the ceiling. A year ago, I would have been paralyzed with anxiety. I would have called a roofer, begged for a payment plan, and laid awake all night staring at the ceiling, feeling helpless. But as I stood there, listening to the drip, I didn't feel helpless. I felt angry. I felt protective. This storm was not going to damage my house. Not this house. Not my legacy. The next morning, the sky was clear. I found an old, rickety extension ladder in the shed. My heart was pounding as I climbed onto the roof, the world tilting precariously below me. I had never done anything like this in my life. I spent 2 hours just looking, finding the cluster of cracked and missing shingles that were the source of the problem. Then, I drove to the hardware store in the next town over, my grandmother's note about monsters in my pocket. I walked the aisles, asking an employee questions that probably sounded incredibly stupid. I came back with a bundle of shingles, a tub of roofing tar, a hammer, and a box of nails. The work was slow and clumsy. I smeared tar on my jeans. I hit my thumb with the hammer, the pain so sharp it made my eyes water. At one point, I slipped on a loose shingle and nearly slid off the roof, my life flashing before my eyes. But I kept going. I pried off the old, broken pieces, sealed the wood beneath, and nailed down the new shingles one by one until the patch was complete. By the time the sun began to set, I was exhausted, bruised, and covered in grime. But as I stood on the ground, looking up at my handiwork, a small, ugly, but solid patch on the old roof, I felt a surge of pride so intense it almost knocked me over. I had faced a problem and I had fixed it. It was a small thing, but it was mine. It was a declaration of independence. That small act of self-reliance solidified my resolve. It was time to take the next step. I needed to understand the financial reality of what I was protecting. I looked up the number for Abernathy and Sons and made the call. Thomas. Mr. Abernathy's voice was warm and filled with a genuine pleasure that I hadn't expected. I confess, I've been waiting for this call. Tell me, son, did you find the reading room? The library? I corrected him gently, a smile in my own voice. I found the library. I could hear him chuckle on the other end. Ah, yes, Maria always called it her reading room, a typical bit of her understatement. She was a remarkable woman, Thomas. She saw things in people they didn't see in themselves. She told me her plan years ago. She said, Abernathy, I'm giving Anton the money, but I'm giving Thomas the wealth. She knew you'd understand the difference. I think I'm starting to, I said. But part of understanding it is protecting it. I need a formal appraisal, for insurance purposes, and I need it to be done by someone who is the absolute best and absolutely discreet. A wise move, he said, his tone shifting back to professional. I have just the person in mind, a senior appraiser from a major auction house. She is the soul of discretion. I will make the arrangements. We set a date for the following Tuesday. After we hung up, I sat at my grandmother's desk, an idea beginning to crystallize. It wasn't about revenge. Revenge was what my family did, petty, cruel, and ultimately empty. This was about truth. It was about balance. The next day, I made another call. This one was to my mother's second cousin, Carol, a woman whose primary hobby was the collection and distribution of family gossip. I chatted with her for 20 minutes about her garden and her grandchildren, and then, just as we were about to hang up, I let it drop. Oh, by the way, I said, injecting a note of weary frustration into my voice. You wouldn't believe the trouble with this old house Grandma left me. It's a money pit. Pipes, roof, you name it. I'm actually having to have some people come out next week to do a full assessment. Probably just to tell me it's worthless and I should tear it down. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. I knew, as surely as I knew my own name, that this piece of news would be on my mother's prayer chain within the hour, and on Anton's desk by morning. My brother's greed and arrogance were as predictable as the sunrise. He wouldn't be able to stand the thought of me getting a formal assessment, no matter how worthless I claimed it was, without him being there to oversee it, to control it, to take his perceived share of it. I hung up the phone. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for the wolves to come to the door. Tuesday dawned bright, crisp, and cold. Ms. Albright, the appraiser Mr. Abernathy had sent, arrived precisely at 9 a.m. She was a tall, elegant woman in her 50s with an air of quiet authority and eyes that missed nothing. I showed her to the library, and she simply paused at the entrance, her professional composure cracking just for a second as she let out a soft, involuntary, "My heavens!" For the next few hours, the only sounds from the library were the soft rustle of pages and her occasional murmur of appreciation. Emma and I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. We made sandwiches in the kitchen, the nervous energy in the air making my hands tremble slightly. I kept glancing out the front window, my stomach a tight knot of anticipation. Every passing car on the distant road made me jump. Around 1 o'clock, just as I was pouring Ms. Albright a cup of coffee during a short break, I heard it. Not the sound of a sensible local car, but the deep, guttural rumble of a high-performance engine, aggressively downshifting as it turned off the main road. I looked out the window. A gleaming black BMW, so polished it reflected the pale autumn sky, was crunching its way up my gravel driveway. It parked at an arrogant angle, taking up far more space than necessary. The doors opened, and they emerged like a landing party from another planet. Anton, in a charcoal gray suit that looked like it was woven from money itself. My father, Richard, his face set in its familiar, judgmental scowl. And my mother, Eleanor, picking her way carefully over the gravel in expensive-looking heels, clutching a designer handbag to her chest as if to ward off the rural squalor. "Dad," Emma said, her voice small. She had seen them too, and she instinctively moved behind me, grabbing a fistful of my jeans. "It's okay, sweetie," I murmured, placing a reassuring hand on her head. "Why don't you go to your room and read for a little while? I'll come get you in a bit." She nodded and scurried off down the hall, a silent little refugee in her own home. She was gone just in time. The front door opened without the courtesy of a knock. "Thomas!" Anton's voice boomed through my small house, a sound too loud and abrasive for the quiet space. "Figured we'd drop in. I had a lunch meeting that finished early not too far from here, and Dad and Mom were with me. Thought we'd come and check on our favorite pioneer." He strode into the living room, his expensive leather shoes clicking on the old floorboards. He took in the simple, clean room with a sweeping, contemptuous gaze. Well, you've certainly made it rustic." My father didn't bother with such subtleties. "Carol called your mother," he said, his voice hard. "Said you were having the place appraised. What foolishness are you up to now, Thomas? We told you we would help you. We are prepared right now to write you a check for this burden. A generous check. Far more than it's worth. Let us take care of this, so you can stop playing games and get back to reality." "Your father is right, dear," my mother added, her voice a soft, cloying symphony of fake concern. She reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back before she could make contact. "You can't raise Emma in a place like this. It's not safe. It's not healthy. We're your family. We just want what's best for you." The three of them stood there, a perfect tableau of condescending power. The concerned family, swooping in to rescue the village idiot from his own incompetence. It was the story of my life, playing out right here in my living room. At that exact moment, Ms. Albright emerged from the hidden entrance to the library. She held a single, medium-sized, leather-bound book in her carefully gloved hands, her attention completely absorbed by it. Anton spotted her and let out a bark of laughter. "Oh, I see. You hired an expert. What's she gonna tell you, Thomas? That grandma's collection of knitting patterns is worth $100? Don't be a child." Ms. Albright looked up from the book, her calm eyes assessing the hostile scene before her. She gave no sign of being intimidated. She turned her attention back to me, her voice professional and quiet, though in the tense silence of the room, it carried perfectly. "Thomas, if you have a moment, I'd like to discuss my preliminary findings. They are significant." Anton, ever the bully, misread her quiet professionalism as weakness. He saw it as his opening to take control. He strode forward, positioning himself between me and Ms. Albright. "No need for secrets here," he announced magnanimously. "We're all family. Go ahead, lay the bad news on him. I'm sure he can take it." He turned to me, pulling a sleek, silver pen and a checkbook from his jacket pocket. "So what's the damage? What's the grand total for this pile of sticks? 5,000? 10? Let's be generous and say 15. I'll write the check right now and we can be done with this miserable business." He clicked the pen, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. My father nodded his solemn approval. My mother looked on, a pained but relieved expression on her face, as if she were witnessing a necessary, if unpleasant, medical procedure. This was it, the moment the entire universe seemed to pivot on. The anger and hurt that had been my constant companions for weeks suddenly evaporated, replaced by a profound, icy calm. I felt like I was standing on a high mountain, looking down at them from a great distance. I let Anton stand there, pen poised over his checkbook, savoring his role as the magnanimous savior. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to exist within the reality they had created. Finally, I spoke. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't tremble. It was as calm and clear as the autumn air outside. "Thank you for the offer, Anton," I said, looking him directly in the eye. "But I'm afraid you might be a little short." I turned my gaze to Ms. Albright. "Ms. Albright," I said politely, "you mentioned your findings were significant. Would you mind elaborating?" She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Of course," she said, her professional gaze sweeping over my family before landing back on me. "While a full cataloging will take weeks, I can say with certainty that this is one of the most important private collections I have ever encountered. The historical and cultural value is, frankly, incalculable." Anton let out an impatient scoff. Value. Just give us the number, lady." Ms. Albright's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. She looked down at the book in her hands. "This particular volume," she said, her voice as crisp as a new banknote, "is a first-edition collection of botanical illustrations from the 17th century. It is one of only 3 known copies in the world. Based on the auction price of the last one sold, a conservative estimate for this single book would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 million. She paused. "That's before we even begin to assess the signed first editions, the historical manuscripts, or the personal correspondence from 2 U.S. presidents." The silence that followed was not just an absence of noise. It was a physical entity. It sucked the air from the room. It was the sound of a world breaking. I watched my brother's face. The smug, confident mask melted away, revealing the terrified, greedy little man beneath. His jaw went slack. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, sickly gray. The silver pen slipped from his nerveless fingers and clattered onto the floor. I watched my father. He staggered back as if he'd been physically struck, his hand flying to his chest. He collapsed into the old armchair, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The unquestionable certainty that had been the bedrock of his personality had just been pulverized. And I watched my mother. Her hands flew to her face, but it wasn't a gesture of shock. It was a gesture of horror. Her eyes, wide and frantic, darted from the book, to the library door, to my face. And in them, I saw it all. The dawning, soul-crushing realization of the sheer magnitude of what they had thrown away. I didn't say a word. I just stood there in the echoing silence, the quiet man, the family failure, and let the beautiful, terrible truth do its work. The silence in the room stretched for what felt like an eternity, thick and heavy with the shrapnel of their shattered reality. It was Anton who finally sputtered back to life, his brain, so accustomed to calculating value, frantically trying to reconfigure the new landscape. "3 million?" he stammered, his voice a hoarse croak. He shook his head, as if trying to clear water from his ears. "No, that's a mistake. A joke. Thomas, this is a joke, right? Some sick, twisted joke." He looked at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading hope that I would let him off the hook. I just stared back at him, my expression blank. I didn't have to say anything. The quiet authority of Ms. Albright, who was now carefully placing the book back on a nearby table, was more convincing than any words I could have spoken. The denial phase passed in a flash, replaced by a raw, frantic greed that was horrifying to witness. Anton's face transformed again, the shock replaced by a slick, predatory cunning. He lunged toward me, his hands spread in a grotesque parody of brotherhood. "Thomas! Tommy!" he said, using a childhood nickname I hadn't heard in 20 years. "Listen to me. Think about this. You can't possibly manage this yourself. You don't have the first clue about finance, about asset management, about taxes. This is a huge responsibility. You need me. I can handle this for us. We'll set up a trust, a family foundation. We're a team. We'll be rich, Tommy. Richer than we ever dreamed." His words came out in a desperate torrent. At the same time, my mother, recovering from her initial shock, rushed to his side, becoming his tearful accomplice. "He's right, Thomas, my sweet boy," she wept, reaching for my arm. Her touch felt like a spider on my skin, and I instinctively pulled away. This is a blessing for the whole family. Grandma would have wanted us to share it. Family takes care of family. We have to stick together, now more than ever. Family. The word, coming from her lips, was the ugliest obscenity I had ever heard. The hypocrisy was so staggering it was almost sublime. They had conspired to cast me out, to exile me to what they thought was a worthless pile of rocks. And now that my pile of rocks had turned out to be a diamond mine, they wanted to talk about sharing. I turned my gaze to my father. He was still slumped in the armchair, a broken man. He hadn't moved. He was staring at his hands, which were trembling in his lap. The patriarch, the judge, the man who had always been so certain of the world and his place in it, had been rendered completely mute. His entire life's philosophy, the worship of tangible success, had just been proven bankrupt. He had backed the wrong horse, and the shock of it had short-circuited his soul. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. For years, I had craved their approval, bent myself into knots trying to earn a scrap of the validation they gave so freely to Anton. And now, in this moment, I realized I didn't need it. I didn't want it. Their approval was worthless because it was conditional. It was based on a spreadsheet of profit and loss, not on love. I looked at Anton's grasping, desperate face. I looked at my mother's tear-streaked, manipulative one. "You want to talk about family?" I asked. My voice was quiet, but it cut through their babbling like a surgeon's scalpel. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hand was as steady as a rock. I opened my email, found the conversation I had saved, the one titled, "The Thomas Problem." With a few deliberate taps, I forwarded the entire ugly chain to my mother and to my father. A few seconds later, the silence was pierced by the sound of two distinct notification chimes. Ping, ping. The sounds were like gunshots in the quiet room. My mother, her face a mask of confusion, fumbled in her oversized handbag for her phone. My father, roused from his catatonic state by the sound, slowly, mechanically, pulled his own phone from his jacket pocket. I watched them read. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. I saw the confusion on my mother's face turn to disbelief, then to a splotchy, red-faced horror as she read her own daughter-in-law's words she had undoubtedly supported. I saw her hand begin to shake. I saw my father's eyes scan the screen, and I saw the last vestiges of his authority crumble. His face, which had been pale with shock, now flushed with a deep, dark red of shame. He read the words that laid their conspiracy bare, the casual cruelty, the dismissal, the necessary amputation of his own son. He let out a small, wounded sound, like an animal in pain, and his phone slipped from his trembling hand, clattering onto the floor. We just thought," my mother stammered, tears now flowing freely down her face. Rebecca said, "It was for the best." The lie died on her lips, exposed and pathetic. Anton looked like he had been punched in the gut. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was checkmated. There was nothing left to say. I let the weight of their actions settle on them, a suffocating blanket of their own making. Then I took a deep, cleansing breath. The air in my lungs felt fresh, free. "Grandma's will was very clear," I said, my voice resonating with a finality that was absolute. "She gave the apartment to you, Anton, a tangible asset, and she gave the house and everything in it to me, the wealth." I walked to the front door and pulled it open. The cold, clean air of the countryside rushed in, sweeping away the stale atmosphere of greed and deceit. "I have chosen my inheritance," I said, looking at each of them in turn. "I suggest you go and enjoy yours." I paused, then added, "Now, please, get out of my house." They stared at me, dumbfounded. The quiet, accommodating Thomas was gone. In his place stood a stranger, a man they didn't know, a man who could not be manipulated or dismissed. Slowly, like sleepwalkers, they began to move. Anton, his face a mask of gray fury and humiliation, wouldn't look at me. My mother, sobbing openly now, was led by the arm by my father, who looked like a ghost, his eyes hollow and empty. They shuffled out of my door, a broken, defeated trio, and climbed back into their magnificent car, which now looked absurdly out of place, a gaudy symbol of a victory that had turned to ash in their mouths. I watched them drive away until the black car was just a speck on the horizon. Then I closed the door. It didn't slam, clicked shut, a quiet, precise, and wonderfully definitive sound. The year that followed was a year of patient, deliberate construction. It wasn't a sudden, magical transformation, but a slow, rewarding process of rebuilding, both a house and a life. The legal and financial complexities of the inheritance were staggering. There were armies of lawyers, insurers, and tax specialists. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't overwhelmed. I was energized. I read every document, I learned the terminology, and I made every decision with a clear head. Mr. Abernathy was my guide, but I was the one at the helm. With a carefully structured loan secured against just 2 of the collection's authenticated manuscripts, I had the capital to do what my heart yearned to do, to heal the house. I didn't want to modernize it or gut its character. I wanted to honor it. I hired a team of local craftsmen, led by the same contractor who had initially been so skeptical of me. He was a man named Gus, with hands like gnarled oak and an encyclopedic knowledge of old houses. I didn't just write checks. I worked alongside them. Gus taught me how to properly glaze a window, how to mix plaster, how to respect the grain of old wood. I spent weeks on my hands and knees, learning to sand and refinish the original wide plank floors. I discovered a deep satisfaction in the physical work, in the tangible results of my labor. With every nail I hammered and every board I measured, I felt like I was repairing a part of myself, strengthening my own foundation. We put on a new roof that would last a century. We restored the sagging porch, turning it into a beautiful, welcoming space where Emma and I would sit on summer evenings. We gave the house a fresh coat of brilliant white paint, and it stood on its hill no longer as a monument to decay, but as a beacon of resilience. The most profound transformation, however, was in Emma, the quiet, anxious child who had arrived in Riverdale as if it were a punishment, blossomed in the safety and peace of our new life. She fell in love with the secret library, which she dubbed the Castle of Stories. She spent hours in there, not just reading, but exploring. She would find an old book on botany and then spend the afternoon in the garden, trying to identify the flowers Mrs. Gable had helped us plant. She learned the constellations from an old astronomy atlas and would drag me outside on clear nights to point them out. Her world, which had been shrinking, was now expanding in every direction. Her laughter, a sound I realized I had heard far too rarely in the city, became the constant, joyful music of our home. This, I knew, was the true measure of my success. I found my own new purpose as well. The library wasn't a treasure to be hoarded. It was a resource to be shared. I began collaborating with universities and museums, making digital copies of the rarest texts available to scholars around the world. And to honor my grandmother's spirit, I used a portion of the estate's funds to establish the Maria Townsend Literacy Foundation. We provided grants to underfunded school libraries and started a local community story hour. Every Saturday morning, we would open up our big living room. I would pick a theme: dragons, pirates, brave girls who saved themselves, and read from the classics. The room would be filled with children from the village, their faces rapt with attention. Emma became my proud assistant, in charge of handing out juice and cookies. Seeing the wonder in those children's eyes, I felt a connection to my old life, but in a new, more meaningful way. I wasn't just a librarian anymore. I was a steward of stories, planting seeds of imagination in a new generation. News of my old family trickled in through the reluctant filter of Mr. Abernathy or the much more enthusiastic filter of my gossip-loving cousin. The fallout from that day had been catastrophic for them. Rebecca had divorced me with ruthless efficiency. Her final communication was a single, acidic email. "I see you've finally found something you love more than people. I hope you and your dusty old books are very happy together." I deleted it without a reply. Anton's empire, built on bluff and borrowed money, had crumbled. Without the expected safety net of a multi-million-dollar inheritance, his creditors had called in their loans. His tech startup went bankrupt, I read in a business journal that he was now working in a mid-level management position for a much larger company. The ultimate humiliation for a man who saw himself as a titan. One afternoon, about a year after the confrontation, an unfamiliar car pulled into my driveway. It was a simple, domestic sedan, a far cry from the German luxury cars my parents had always favored. My mother, Eleanor, got out. She looked older, smaller, and profoundly tired. The expensive, perfectly coiffed armor she used to wear was gone. She wore a simple coat and her hair was streaked with more gray than I remembered. She didn't approach the house. She just stood by the low stone wall that bordered the garden, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. I was in the yard, weeding the daisies with Emma. I told Emma to go inside and get a glass of water, and I walked slowly toward my mother. "Thomas," she said, her voice thin. She couldn't meet my eyes. Her gaze was fixed on the house, on the new paint, the sturdy porch. "The place, it looks beautiful. It's a good house," I said, my tone neutral. "It just needed some love." The silence between us was heavy with unspoken words. I could see a battle raging within her. She started, her voice cracking. She stopped, took a shaky breath, and tried again. "I came to tell you I'm sorry." "No, that's not right. Sorry is too small a word. It's useless." She finally looked at me, and her eyes were swimming with a grief that was raw and real. "When I was a girl," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "we were poor, not can't afford a vacation poor. I mean, holes in our shoes poor. I remember the shame, the constant, grinding fear. I swore to God that my children would never feel that. They would be safe. They would have things." She gestured vaguely with a trembling hand. "I got so obsessed with building a wall of things around you both, and Anton was so good at stacking the bricks, that I stopped seeing anything else. I looked at you with your books and your quiet world, and I saw a risk, a vulnerability. I thought your softness was a weakness that would let the poverty in. And that fear, it made me cruel. It made me a monster. I am living with what I did every single day," she continued, tears now rolling freely down her cheeks. "I lost my son, not the one I thought was a success. I lost you, and I can never get you back. I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I wanted you to know that it wasn't because I didn't love you. It was because I was a coward." She didn't wait for a response. She turned, walked stiffly back to her car, and drove away, leaving me standing there with her painful, inadequate confession hanging in the air. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger. I just felt a deep, profound sorrow for the years we had lost, and for the fears that had cost us everything. Tonight, 2 years have passed since Emma and I first stood on this property, terrified and alone. A gentle snow is falling, thick, silent flakes drifting down through the dark, blanketing the world in a pristine layer of white. The fire crackles and spits in the hearth, its warm light casting dancing shadows on the bookshelves that now line the living room walls. The whole house smells of wood smoke, pine needles from our Christmas tree, and the faint, sweet scent of the gingerbread cookies Emma and I decorated this afternoon. Emma is 9 now, on the cusp of 10, and the transformation in her is my life's greatest work. The anxious little girl is gone, replaced by a confident, thoughtful, and funny young person. She's curled up in the enormous, tufted armchair that used to be my grandmother's, an armchair we now call the Story Throne. She's not reading a fairy tale anymore. She's halfway through Dune, her brow furrowed in concentration as she navigates the complex politics of Arrakis. She looks up, as if sensing my gaze, and her face breaks into a wide, easy smile. "Dad," she says, "do you think they have giant sandworms in other galaxies?" "I don't know, sweetie," I say, smiling back. "But if they do, I bet there's a book about them in the library." Her smile widens. "Probably." I look at her, my daughter, so at home in her own skin, so secure in her world, and I realize, with a clarity that is both humbling and exhilarating, what my true inheritance was. For so long, I thought the treasure was the library, the incredible monetary value of the books, the shock on my family's faces, the poetic justice of it all. But I was wrong. That wasn't the treasure. That was just the key that unlocked the door. The real inheritance was the chance to escape. The chance to break free from a family dynamic that was slowly suffocating me. It was the gift of being forced to stand on my own 2 feet, to discover a strength and competence I never knew I possessed. It was the opportunity to build a life on my own terms, based on my own values. The greatest treasure my grandmother left me wasn't her collection of books, but the chance to become the father my daughter deserved. My legacy won't be a number in a bank account or a collection of rare artifacts. It will be the lessons I pass on to Emma. The knowledge that your worth is not defined by others. That strength can be quiet. That a life filled with stories and love is a rich life indeed. That is the only inheritance that truly matters. It's the one I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to fight to define your own worth? Share your story in the comments below. And please, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.